Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a comparison between the Microsoft Surface Pro 7 and the HP Spectre X360. Now, for those of you that have been following my coverage of Intel's 10th Gen Ice Lake products like these, you already know I'm a big fan of what's been put out there. In fact, that's why I'm personally in the market for a new laptop. But before I get into comparing these, let's go over pricing and specifications. With the Surface Pro 7, I've got the Core i5 with 8 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage. It retails for $11.99. Throw in the type cover, that's another $160, at least for this model, another $100 for the pen, and you're a little under $1,500 US before tax. The Spectre X360 also has, as I mentioned, a 10th Gen Ice Lake processor, but this build, which retails for $16.99 US, comes with a Core i7-1065 G7 CPU with Iris Plus, 16 gigs of RAM, and a 1 terabyte Intel SSD. We also get a 4K 13.3-inch OLED, whereas the display on the good old Surface Pro is, well, the good old display, 2736 by 1824. It does have a 3:2 aspect ratio, whereas we're dealing with a 16:9, really more of a content consumption display on the HP. But the fact that it's got a 4K OLED, it already has my attention, more so than the aged display that we're getting with the Surface Pro 7. And in terms of the actual form factor, of course, the Surface Pro 7 takes the cake in its category, nothing else like it. You've got a 1.7-pound tablet with a micro SD card slot on the back. We now finally have a Type-C port, which was long overdue, a Type-A port. You can charge using the Type-C. You will need a 65-watt charger, so don't think you're just going to plug in your smartphone's charger and get going. Both of these charge up in roughly 2 hours. Both of them, in terms of battery life, will run, Microsoft rates this at 10 hours. HP rates this at 9 with the 4K OLED that this model sports. Real world use, my experience, you're going to get better battery life than the HP with the Surface Pro 7. You're looking at, with mixed use, about, I would say, 8 to 9 hours here, 7 to 8 hours, possibly less, depending on how high you keep the brightness. I mean, the HP absolutely will sip that battery, gulp that battery down much quicker than the Surface Pro 7. Let's get into some content consumption. I have benchmarked both of these machines heavily, so for those of you that are wondering what performance is like, they're very close, in spite of the fact that we've got a Core i7 processor versus a Core i5 and twice the amount of RAM, and more than twice the amount of storage on the right. It's still very close. And I know I didn't give you a tour of the body of the Spectre. I will, but let's get into that content consumption. Let's go ahead and jump over to YouTube. I'll do the same on here. It's actually already set up. By the way, the keyboards are a wash to me. They both have really nice chiclet style keyboards with solid key travel. So I appreciate both keyboards and think that they're both very good. I actually like the trackpad, the touchpad on the type cover more than the touchpad. They're very similar again than on the one on the HP. They both are using Microsoft Precision. HP did not used to. The big difference, though, in my opinion, is that it's all about build quality, which unfortunately, when it comes to the HP, whenever I do a touch left click on this, meaning not actually pressing down, unfortunately, this whole touchpad moves, whereas the Microsoft reacts as it should. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe I'll use a different sample here. Maybe I'll go with this one, which is LG's 4K video sample. Whoops. Wi-Fi performance on both of these, by the way, is very good. And I'm going to do these. Let's start with the Surface, which this should be playing back in 4K. It is. Remember, it's not a 4K display. There's no HDR happening here. It's still very good, but you're getting the black bars because this is a 3:2 aspect ratio. And audio on this is not as good as it is on the HP. I'm gonna go ahead and stop that right there, and let's play this a little bit. Wi-Fi performance on the Surface Pro 7 is better in my experience. Not by a huge amount, but by enough that I'm mentioning it here. Now, I think you may have already noticed that the OLED just takes a giant dump on the Surface Pro 7's display. I have no other way of putting it, and that's because the OLED is just that much better, and not just because it's 4K, but because it's an OLED. And if you know me, if you follow my channel, you know what I think of OLEDs. Now, it isn't perfect. You may have noticed that, and actually I want to get this up to the exact same frame, so let's get it up to 40 seconds. Almost. Right there. Colors on the OLED are far more vibrant. Color accuracy is far more vibrant. It's a brighter display as well. I think it's around 400 or 500 nits. I'm blanking right now on whether it's 400 or 500. The Surface just isn't coming close to that. I mean, it's close, but it's not there. But if I go to just, like I had open earlier, just, you know, Chrome, you should instantly see the color difference in terms of temperature. Warmer on the right with the OLED, cooler with the LCD display. But again, accuracy, brightness, vibrancy, it all lives here in the OLED display. If you were to not have these side by side, yes, you would still notice that the white is a warmer tint, but not so much so that it doesn't look like the color white anymore. So I just want to point that out so there are no surprises. And when it comes to general web browsing, let's go over to the red zone. Oops. You know, it's a wash. And that's why I keep saying, if you're talking about the actual performance, did I not? Yeah, I wrote it out correctly. I wonder why it's not autofilling. It's a wash when it comes to web browsing and content consumption for the most part. It's really where you get to more intensive stuff that the i7 with the Iris Plus and the extra RAM make a tangible difference. The same also applies to gaming. The touchscreen experience, very similar, but I do prefer the experience with the OLED. I'll go ahead and open up a piece of news. I don't really want to look at anything regarding my Giants. Yesterday was disgusting, but at least I expected to be disgusted, unlike Dallas fans, I guess. But again, everything works as it should. No problems with general content consumption. Make sure I didn't push that out of frame. They're both very good at that. But content consumption, really the medal, the award goes to the Spectre between the display that it has and the audio performance. Neither the display or the audio performance on the Surface Pro 7 will outshine the Spectre, but you do get that 3:2 aspect ratio, which I know some people prefer the additional height. For web browsing, you're going to get more information, at least visually speaking, and that'll be important to a lot of consumers. So if that is your priority, the 3:2 aspect ratio is living here. It's not living here with the Spectre. So let's move away from content consumption, browsing the web, things like that. Let's talk about benchmarking, and then I'll get to pen input. So with benchmarking, the Core i5 is actually pretty close to the Core i7, enough that I would, again, reiterate, unless you're going to edit in 4K, unless you're going to do raw photo editing, you probably don't need the Core i7. And if you want to do more extensive gaming, you probably do need the Iris Plus, in the same way that if you're doing 4K editing or, you know, very large file raw editing and photo, you would need the Iris Plus. You would want it, not need it. I would not recommend doing that with the Core i5 without the Iris Plus, because it's just far from ideal. I mean, this is as good as it's going to get in an ultrabook realm. Here, you're taking the middle road, which is really a compromise on performance in order to get the fanless, ultra quiet. It is really a silent experience, but it's also not hot. I mean, the Surface Pro 7 does not run anywhere near as hot as the HP Spectre. The Spectre, you know, it just heats up, and as good as HP put forward the effort, as good a job as they did to try to make this machine cool, it's still incredibly small. I mean, I mentioned 1.7 pounds for the Surface Pro 7. Throw in the touch, the type cover, excuse me, you're looking at roughly 2. This comes in at 2.8 pounds and change, the Spectre. So for that, not a full pound, but 3/4 plus pound difference, you are getting a lot more hardware. You are getting a physical keyboard, a physical trackpad, all that good stuff. You are getting more I/O. As I mentioned, with the Surface Pro 7, all we have are literally the Type-C, which is not a Thunderbolt, good for charging, but that's about it. And of course, connecting to displays and external drives, and the Type-A port. But with the Spectre, you have quite a bit more going on. I'm going to show you that right now. You've got the two Type-C Thunderbolt ports right here. You can use whichever you want for power. It's really up to you. You've got a privacy switch for your camera, kill switch, your micro SD card slot right there. And then on the other side of the machine, you have your headphone and microphone combo jack and a Type-A port. So there's more going on here. You also have a fingerprint scanner that you do not get. And as I mentioned, both of these have Windows Hello, but if you want the sleek, bezel-less look, it lives here. It doesn't live in Surface Pro's bezel town, as I will call it. So, you know, the Surface Pro 7, it's really all about getting that two-in-one that is the tablet that can replace your laptop. The two-in-one here with the HP Spectre, this is the laptop that aims to replace your tablet. So they're completely different approaches. And yes, HP makes the Folio, but I think the Folio is trash compared to the Surface Pro. I'm not going to get into that. That's not what today's review is about. And I'm not really talking about styling or anything because that's a complete matter of personal preference. But the Surface Pro 7 absolutely still accomplishes exactly what it sets out to. Do I think it's due for a refresh? Of course I do. And the HP Spectre did get that refresh in terms of design. That's why we have the 90% screen to body ratio. It's virtually the complete opposite of what we have with the Surface Pro 7. But again, when it comes to the Core i5 and 8 gigs of RAM, it does fine on benchmarking. Cinebench, 3D Mark, what else did I run? Geekbench. I did like gaming with it. The Surface Pro 7 can do it all with the Core i5, at least that you can expect from an Ultrabook, and that's admirable considering this is the Core i5 model. Now, if through the course of this review you've been wondering, Ed, why didn't you compare the Core i7 with 16 gigs of RAM? It's because it's ridiculously overpriced. I mean, it makes the HP look like a budget machine at $16.99. Remember, with the HP, you're getting the pen, and you know, the pen works well, but it's not as good as the experience with the Surface Pro 7. So for those of you that are wondering, for inking, the Surface Pro 7 is the better experience. No question about that. And you know, with the Surface Pro X, we even have a new pen. I'll be reviewing all of that stuff. It should arrive tomorrow. At least that's the ETA for me. And hopefully I'll be able to compare it directly to the Surface Pro 7 as well, even though one is an ARM chip and one is, you know, an Intel, a true processor, not a mobile processor. But between these two machines, I personally would pick the HP every single time. But to give you a very good example of who the Surface Pro 7 is still for, I have a family member who needs a new laptop, and that person's priority is weight. They want the lightest machine without compromising power. Well, that's where the Surface Pro 7 still has quite a bit left in the tank, because fact is that family member will not take that extra 0.8 of a pound, even with all the advantages that the HP has. So that's something to bear in mind. So if your ultimate goal is to have the most lightweight machine, the Surface Pro 7 still accomplishes that better than any other machine on the market, in my opinion. But again, if you want specs like the HP, and you won't be able to get the OLED, but just the internals, you're spending over $2,000. In fact, if we just wanted to go to 16 gigs of RAM with the Surface Pro 7, you're looking at, I think, $1,400, or yeah, I think that's it, $1,399. And I would never recommend that model because I think for 100 or it's 200 more, you move to the i7 with 16 gigs of RAM. Granted, it's not the same amount of physical storage, but there's no way I would ever recommend someone to put themselves in the top of the line Core i5 model here. It makes no sense. You want to go to the i7. But once you've done that, you're already, I believe, the price is already higher than the Spectre, and you still don't have a keyboard or a pen. So it makes it tough for me to recommend Surface Pro 7 models unless you absolutely must have them. And that's where I leave things here, is that I've talked about battery life, you know, build quality goes to the Surface Pro 7. I mean, my HP has flex and a popping here on the chassis. None of that is ever going to happen with the Surface Pro 7. But the Surface Pro 7 is also never going to have, at least in this generation, a 4K display, let alone an OLED. And this is a bigger screen by an inch than you get with the Surface Pro. In addition to that, you already know to get the internals here, you're spending another you know, $700–800 than what this model costs. So in total, it's about $500 more than the Spectre to get similar specs, and that's removing the quality of the display. You will never match, of course, the I/O either. This can be connected to an external GPU. It just has far greater range and flexibility than the Surface Pro. And that's just a fact of life. But better battery life, better build quality, you know, more lightweight, that all goes to the Surface Pro 7. Of course, the aspect ratio, again, if that's one of the most important things to you. And I know for a lot of people it is. But when it comes to the processors, as I've mentioned, I've benchmarked them out, benchmarked the Lenovo C940 and the Surface Laptop 3 as well. And they're close enough that I'm not going to steer someone towards the Spectre simply because it has more horsepower, because I think ultimately the choice comes down to which form factor you're looking to have. The Spectre, as we know, does the 360-degree hinge. You can throw it into tent mode. You can also, hopefully that doesn't slide right now, you can also go into a content consumption mode like this. I mean, it's got flexibility, but as I mentioned, this is the laptop that aims to replace your tablet, whereas, you know, the Surface Pro 7 is the tablet that aims to replace your laptop. So different strokes for different folks. I think they're both great machines. I don't think you'll go wrong with either of them. The Spectre is definitely the more fleshed out build. It's more powerful, more affordable, and I think has a lot more to offer. But at the end of the day, it's all going to be about what form factor you're looking to get, because otherwise you would never even consider the Surface Pro 7, in my opinion. And when it comes to support from manufacturers, HP is like any other big box OEM, you know, Dell, of course, Lenovo. Service is going to be a bit of a nightmare. They will refurbish your machine. When I say refurbish, repair your machine. With Microsoft, they're going to just send you a refurb, but you have the advantage of having brick and mortar locations where you can get things resolved and not go crazy on the phone with support that's outsourced to people who may or may not speak English. And I got to point it out because that's the reality of both of these, and that doesn't apply to everyone all around the globe, but at least for US customers. But I'm sure it does in many ways apply to people around the globe. I don't know what kind of call centers people in Europe or Asia get when they call in and have an issue. What I will also mention is in terms of upgradability and repairability, no upgradability here or repairability. Here you have both. The SSD can be upgraded. RAM is soldered on, for those of you that are wondering. But it can be repaired. An end user like myself or you watching this video can open this up and stick a new SSD in there. You can throw in a brand new NVMe. Get rid of the Intel if you want in favor of a Samsung Pro NVMe or an EVO, depending on how much money you want to spend and how important performance is to you. So it's all a matter of personal preference. One is more of a traditional laptop. That's clear from the fact that you can even open it up and do something, whereas the other is basically throwaway when it's done. But again, from a service standpoint, I think the brick and mortar locations that Microsoft has, even though I don't have one anywhere near me, is definitely a pro that the Surface Pro 7 has in its favor. But that's pretty much it. You already know about display quality. You know about processor performance. I mean, I've mentioned the benchmarks. I didn't give you numbers. I've done that in other videos, updates and comparisons. And I don't think it really applies here, even with the fact that the i5 isn't that far from the i7. It's really just in gaming and editing where you're going to really see the benefit of the i7. And that's pretty much true to previous generations too, but more so this year. No question about that. But that pretty much covers everything. Again, they're both great machines. The HP is the one I would personally pick, but I've already given you an example of a family member that I've steered towards the Surface Pro 7 because I know they don't want to carry around that extra, you know, nearly 1 pound. Even if it has a million benefits, they're not interested in more weight because it's not going to change the way they work. And that's what it really boils down to. Is it going to change the way you work or not? And if you're just playing, you know, CSGO, both of these are going to be fine. If you want to play a newer title like Call of Duty World War II, I'm not going to mention the newest Call of Duty. I didn't install that on either of these, but if you're going to go that route, as I said, with World War II, it runs on both of these. Not a fantastic game, but it's okay. But it's definitely going to run better with the Iris Plus graphics. You know, Shadow of Mordor, it runs on here. That's an old title. Of course, it'll run better here. It all depends what you're looking to do. I benchmarked both of these with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and with that, about 27, 28 frames here. It was between 26 to 28 given, any benchmark essentially at any time of day. Here, you're looking at probably around 6 to 10 frames per second less, to give you an idea. But that's a more intensive title. When you go to things like CSGO, stuff like that, you're not going to have any problem gaming in 720p or 1080. But if you want to do more gaming overall, you need the Iris Plus, in my opinion. Again, you can game with this, just understand and respect the limitations. That pretty much covers it. Like both of these a lot, but as I've said, I think 3 or 4 times, I'll pick the Spectre all day long over the Surface Pro 7, unless my life depends on mobility, literally. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button, and as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.